All right. We're just now going live. Welcome to another episode of the Managing Partners Podcast. If you're just tuning in, if you got any questions along the way, please ask me or my guest, and we'll be sure to answer those questions for you. Today, I'm joined by Barry Chase. Barry, you're out of Miami. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself. I'd like to find out a little bit first, you personally, just a little bit. And then we'll get into some business questions about your firm, how you're operating, and some cool stories that you can share with us.
Okay. Again, my name is Barry Chase. Currently, I style myself the Senior Partner at ChaseLawyers, which is the DBA for our, it's a registered mark, actually. I was born and brought up in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is a good place to be from, and ended up going to Yale. Which was important to me because I had a camp counselor when I was 12 years old or 13 years old. He was the coolest guy I ever met, and he sang us all the Yale fight songs and stuff. So I always wanted to go to Yale, and I did go to Yale, and then I went to Harvard Law School. I started out as a lawyer with a lot of First Amendment and entertainment-related matters. It was in a large firm that happened to represent CBS and also Capital Cities, which later bought a lot of TV stations. But I got into TV and film. I'm old enough so that I was actually involved in some of the Watergate stuff as a buck private lawyer, which means I'm the one who did all the work, and the other guys signed the brief above me. But that's what happens in big firms. Anyway, I went from there to the Public Broadcasting Service, where I was the vice president for the network programming. And then left there in the 90s, partly because my mother was ill in Florida and partly because my wife and I had visited Florida and we sort of got hooked. So that's why we're here. And in 1996, coming up on 25 years, I founded what is now ChaseLawyers, and we have 5 attorneys currently working with the firm, and we look forward to a lot of growth in the next few years. So
excellent, Barry. Oh, great story. So I just got back from Florida last week. I was down in Fort Lauderdale with a family vacation. So beautiful down there. The weather's a little bit nicer here or there than it is here in Virginia right now. But interesting story. Very interesting story. So
particularly beautiful day today, I'm afraid, Kevin.
What's the weather like there right now?
What's that? It's about 75. My wife and I have an apartment on the beach. I'm not in my office at the moment. That's why you're seeing this pink wall behind me, courtesy of my wife's deco taste. She's the resident artist at the Art Deco Center in South Beach, which is the organization that owns all those buildings. But I have been going back to the office on a sporadic basis. I'll be back there certainly later this week because I've got a meeting in town on Friday. But it's beautiful here. It's very seductive. Don't come here unless you think you might get sucked in. I mean, if you're not worried about getting sucked in and looking for real estate, you can come to Florida.
It's beautiful down there. I love it. I look forward to visiting again soon. So give us a little, your expertise, practice areas that you serve in. And then, I think before we jumped on here, you have some really interesting cases that you've worked, or I guess clients that you supported. Can't name them by name, but I'm sure you got some cool stories that you can share with the audience.
Lawyer-client confidentiality sort of interferes with a lot of this stuff, although there are plenty of lawyers who seem to violate that. I have clients, some of whom would not appreciate my divulging their names, so we don't do that unless something special comes up and I've got to call somebody and say, hey, can I mention you? But here's what happened with me. Because I came down here partly to take care of my sick mother, and I really had no roots whatsoever in Florida. I'm, a New England kid. I had gone to D.C. As a lawyer for 5 years in that big firm, and I knew that I couldn't stand the usual lawyer thing, which is doing the same thing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I figured that by my 5th or 6th real estate closing that week, I would jump out the window of the high rise. So I tried to look for an area that I thought would keep me interested. And entertainment law sort of popped up. Entertainment, sports, arts. I didn't realize how interesting it could be. Sometimes it's more interesting than I bargained for. But you get into some things that really are interesting. I mean, I was just telling you before we got on the air, as it were, about a case against, it wasn't against, but I was negotiating with Kim Kardashian's, I can mention her because she was the other side, with Kim Kardashian's agent over an appearance, not an appearance, but a photo session she was going to do. I don't remember where it was. It was somewhere in the Middle East, though, I believe. She's wildly popular in the Middle East, whether people know it or not. And she was modeling.
She's got it everywhere.
Yeah, but particularly in the Middle East. No, I think that she's been adopted. She's Armenian, and so she was adopted as sort of close enough to us to become especially popular. So she's wildly popular there, and she was modeling these colored contact lenses to permit a person to change that person's eye color. And I remember that the negotiation started at $1 million for a one-day shoot. On behalf of my client, we eventually got her down to $400,000, and this was a long time ago. $400,000, which still sounds like a pretty good day's work, including all expenses and all the rest. So, you get into that kind of thing. I now have a model client who's become a phenomenon. She's signed to a big New York agency and has, I think the biggest number I've ever heard that's come through her is a $300,000. She's not, I guess, at Kim Kardashian's level quite yet, but she'll get there. $300,000 for a one-day shoot in Paris for an international company whose name you'd recognize, for a campaign that they were building around her. So that some of this stuff is sort of fun by dint of the window you get into what celebrities get paid. We now are dealing with a lot of
that's a lot of money.
Social media influencers, some of whom make a lot more money than you probably suspect they do. And a lot of them are on a site called OnlyFans. It's a social media site that gets a little raunchy at times because it doesn't have strict rules against raunchy material. So a lot of those people make money, and I have companies that want to get into that business, and I have a number of models as clients who need to be protected against the people who put them on OnlyFans, who are not necessarily the most generous people with the highest level of integrity. And that's also true, by the way, I can tell you of we do film and we do TV and we do a lot of music. Music is probably the biggest single area. And I can tell you that in all those areas, music, except possibly for this new social media clientele, music is the dirtiest area we deal with. I mean, I don't want to offend anybody who may be watching this, but there are not a lot of people in the music business who operate out of honesty and integrity, or much less kindness. It's very much a "what did you do for me yesterday" kind of business. It's always been that way. And that's just the nature of the culture. So it's very important to protect the interests of the clients, and we do that. I mean, that's basically what we're up to in the contracts and the advice we give them.
Very interesting. So I don't quite get 300,000 per day for my photos, but I'm working on it. So
no, clients. You can't miss.
I get a better agent, I guess.
Maybe.
Well, that's exciting stuff. So you're working with some really cool. You're involved in some really cool.
We have sports.
With some cool clients.
We have a lot of combat sports figures for whom we also do immigration work, because those are global sports, and people come in from foreign countries all the time for a promoter's list of bouts or what have you. And particularly my client Greg Bloom is very heavily into that, and represents, in fact, again, I won't mention the name, but represents the largest Spanish language combat sports company in the world. So we're doing okay, and we have somewhere in there we managed to fit in a fair amount of fun. It's not, but as I always tell people, it's not when associates or would-be associates come and want to interview with us. I say, well, it's not singing and dancing. It's entertainment law, and the last name is Law, and that's our part of it. And we endeavor. The first firm I was with was a very, very high-level firm. I mean, I did very well at Harvard Law School. I was sort of mid-pack in that firm. And so it was a very, very good firm. And in the era of what was called zero error lawyering, we pretty much did that. So I was steeped in that sort of thing, and we try to keep it at zero mistakes.
Excellent. I love it. So you mentioned a little bit that, you guys are doing well. It sounds like you have a lot of interesting clients that, are going to do well for you. Give us a little bit of, when you started the firm, how you've grown it to where it is, but then also how have you broken into some of this and getting these clients, and what have you done? Is it picking up the phone? Is it connect with people? Is it a marketing strategy? What has worked for you guys, and how have you grown the firm to where it is?
Right. Well, fortunately, some of our attorneys, and this is true of the younger ones more than the middle-aged or older ones, but the younger attorneys are very hip to this. And I can tell you that, just to give you a little history, I thought, because here I was, descending on South Florida, where 25 years ago, I don't want to denigrate anybody, but there weren't a lot of sort of high-level lawyers, the kind I was used to working with in DC. And I spent a lot of time in New York as well. I used to travel a lot. There weren't a lot of lawyers down here that I thought had those same standards of professionalism. And it's improved a great deal in those 25 years. But at the time, I thought all I had to do was stick at the time there were yellow pages. You may be too young to remember those, but there were things called yellow pages. They were they were sort of the Google search.
I remember those things.
At the time, okay. And I thought if I just put a sort of banner ad in the yellow pages and mentioned that I was a Yale and Harvard guy, and I graduated with honors from both, that the clients would, of course, flock to me because, here's a guy from Yale and Harvard, my God. Well, that didn't happen, or it didn't happen adequately. I also, another interesting story. I had a relationship with a very top-notch Spanish language performer, television person, happened to be a chef and comedian, one of those kinds of chefs. And charming guy, lovely guy.
Best chef.
He was very good. And, he wasn't trained as a chef, but he was funny on TV and he could cook. And I remember when I opened the law firm, because I knew him from before, from my TV days, that he said to me, I wish you a lot of luck, although I don't know why I would need a lawyer, says he. I haven't been arrested. So that's where I sort of had to start. The idea of using a lawyer to make sure that you stayed out of trouble, or that you got a fairer deal, or that you were better protected in a contract negotiation, really didn't compute in those days in South Florida with a lot of my potential client base. So that told me I was in some trouble. And I began getting more active in organizations, not just lawyer organizations, but chambers of commerce and things like that, because no one knew me here. A lot of the lawyers in Miami Beach, we also have an office in New York, by the way. And I'm a New York lawyer as well as a DC lawyer, along with the Florida bar. I started to go to these business-oriented type meetings and just get around, because a lot of the other lawyers had gone to high school together, or had gone to high school with people who were now in the real estate development business and were building buildings. And so they were hired as the lawyers. And I really didn't have that base at all. I was really a blank here. And when I came down here, I was already middle-aged. So, it was a little tough to pick up. There are and were entertainment lawyers, almost all oriented toward music here. Film has grown to some extent, though it is still not the industry that it should be here in South Florida, partly because it rains unpredictably, by the way. One of the reasons why it happened in Los Angeles and not in Florida is because the New York, largely Jewish guys who set up the film industry came down here in the 20s and stuff, and they wanted to produce here. It's a shorter trip. At the time, it wasn't air travel; it's trains for the most part. And but they discovered that they would schedule, and I discovered this producing here occasionally. They would schedule a shoot, and out of the blue would come one of these squalls, over the Atlantic Ocean, and they'd be drenched. And you can't have camera equipment out there. You can't have you couldn't then certainly, and you really can't now either, have electronic equipment in one of the sort of monsoon-like storms that we can get that are almost unpredictable here. So it ended up going to Los Angeles, where for many months of the year it's a desert, and you're not going to get rain. So that made sense, and it still makes sense. So the film industry is a little bit behind the eight ball here. The TV is mostly Spanish language. We have Telemundo and Univision, both of which produce from here, though they're not owned from here. They're difficult to negotiate with, mostly because Univision is the 800-pound gorilla. And I think it's still got about 80% or more of the Spanish language TV market. And so they don't really have to negotiate. I mean, I did do some negotiating for on-air talent with them, but they're more difficult than they would otherwise be, simply because there's no place else to go where you can command that kind of audience if you're a Spanish language personality. So that had obstacles.
What's really interesting about the reason for the film industry not to have set up shop in Florida as much.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I once on a sort of a flyer, we had a couple of, you may remember Philip Michael Thomas, who was the sidekick to, I can't remember his name now, on Miami Vice. We had hired him to front a series, and we were doing a pilot, and out they went to the location, and everything was just great, and it had long been scheduled, and he was on time, and he's a professional, and it rained like hell, and it completely ruined the shoot. So that was an example of why Louis B. Mayer didn't decide to set up in Miami, but rather went to Los Angeles. That was one of it. The part that remained was music, and because it is the barriers to entry, meaning you don't have to have hundreds of thousands the way you would in film or TV. And the barriers to entry aren't so high. And the fact that we also have a Caribbean community here, which is so brilliant in making the kinds of music they make, whether it's reggaeton or reggae or Haitian music, and they're all a little bit different. The only problem with that group is they don't believe in writing anything down. And unfortunately, under the copyright laws, it's fortunate for the judges and I suppose for us lawyers, but the copyright law says right in the act that unless something's in a written instrument, it's not that you can't prove it in court, it's that you didn't do it. It didn't happen unless it's in a written instrument. So if I have a book and I want to license it exclusively to a publisher, which is the typical publishing deal, we do literary work as well, it has to be in writing in order to happen. If we just do it orally, the publisher, someone could later sue the publisher for infringement because they didn't have the right to do what they were doing with the copyrighted work. So there are certain obstacles even with the Caribbean music producers, although again, that's improving, that's changing. And we have a lot of hip hop here and abouts. Not as much rock, a certain amount of folk, a little bit of country, but a lot of reggaeton and hip hop. So
interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, one of the other things that's interesting is for a long time, and I still do it. Typically the hip hop client will come in with 15 people. That's his posse, right? Including some beautiful women, so that's a good thing for me. I don't want to offend anybody, but it's entertaining, visually good, and they'll come in there, and I have to say to them, you know about lawyer-client privilege, right? They say, yeah, and anything I say to you, you can't testify. They can't make you say it. They can't make you testify against me. And I say, yeah, that's true, except that these people around here, unless you're married to all of them, they ruin the privilege. In other words, if I say something to you or you say something to me in front of people who don't share a testimonial privilege, I hate to use fancy words like that, but a privilege against testifying, they can force me to say what I told you, and they can force you to say what you told me. So I've had some occasions where 14 of the 15 people who are in there will have to walk out. It's only the wife, if there is a wife, or husband, occasionally. They all had to go out in the lobby and wait. In some cases,
That makes sense.
I say to them, I know you're not going to tell me you just murdered somebody, or that you're about to go out and murder somebody. But nevertheless, you never can tell what you're going to say to me. So it's an abundance of caution. So that became a sort of a thing, and it's sort of silly because the lobby's full of people who don't look like they're waiting for a real estate lawyer. Anyway, that's pretty.
So what is we got a couple of questions that came in. I'll get to this in a second.
To real estate lawyers, by the way. I mean, they.
If there's any real estate lawyers listening, it's not against.
Actually, literally, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but one of my best friends is a real estate lawyer who does very well in a large firm here, and he's a real sweet guy, and he's not a bit boring. But as I say, the 5th or 6th closing that week, and I'm done. So I like to do a variety of things. It does have the disadvantage, I will say to the listeners, and I hate to say this, but it's got the disadvantage of that at times something will come to me and I've really never done anything like that. So I will tell the client, I'm not going to charge you for my time in learning about this. And if after making a good faith effort for a few hours to do that, because I love learning, always have loved learning. If I don't feel qualified and really well steeped in this, I'm going to tell you to go to someone else. And I've done that. My wife doesn't like that, but I've done that.
Yeah. Well, that's really nice of you. I think that's a really interesting way. I mean, you're learning something new. You feel that you're going to be able to help them. You continue to help them. If not, I
can help them. And then I also have a new area of some expertise, at least. So it's not as if the inventory of my value has increased. And that's something that can never be taken away from me. I now know something about like bankruptcy. I have one client who's not in bankruptcy himself, but a company that owed him a lot of money filed for bankruptcy. So I had to brush up on bankruptcy enough to at least not ruin his chances of getting a payout.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, so that'll lead me to this question, and then we got a couple questions that came in too. We'll talk or answer those. What is your outlook? What's your plan?
Yeah,
for the firm? Are you looking to add more partners, or what is your next, let's say, 5 to 10 years look like?
Well, we definitely are looking to add lawyers. We're not in a position, or we've never done it. And we don't have to promise sort of a weekly salary to people. People are dying to do this. By the way, one of the reasons I think is not necessarily an exalted reason. It's because if you're at a party and you sidle up next to a woman you want to talk to, I'm sorry, I'm a guy again, heterosexual guy, and all that, but you sidle up to someone you want to talk to and want to get to know, they're going to ask you what you do. And if you say I'm a lawyer, they will tend to slink away. If you say I'm an entertainment lawyer, you're going to have a conversation. It changes. Sometimes you'll have an overly enthusiastic conversation, with the old, oh God, I've just done my first book, and gee, do you mind reading it? Which leads to a discussion about what I charge, which I charge less for reading creative work of a client. But I can't read a 15 or 20 hour book without charging. So sometimes it creates problems. But we have a lot of people who are interested in becoming, quote, entertainment lawyers or sports lawyers, and they are exciting. It is more exciting. It is more interesting. It's frustrating because you're not dealing with literally business people all the time. And there are certain things that you have to teach these people. Also, a lot of them are very young. I have many clients in their early 20s, and why should they know anything about any of this? And you tell them the copyright law, you got to write it down. I usually get some skepticism back. Well, that's because you're a lawyer and you want to make money. Yeah, but it also says I'll show it to you in the Copyright Act, and it does say that. So it's got its pluses and minuses. But we are planning to expand over the next decade or two. We have started to market aggressively on social media. Can't say I did too much of that until the last 6 or 8 months. But it's obvious from our client base coming to us like that, and the number of particularly entertainment and sports figures who are constantly on social media.
It's a great place to be for that. Absolutely.
Absolutely, and I've got one client right now who's doing a music mirroring app. There is one already called Earbuds. And the idea there is that while Taylor Swift is backstage preparing for her concert, you can listen in on the playlist that she's got in her ears. And you can be there right with her, and you can even hear things that are going on around her. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
I never heard of that one.
Well,
write that down.
There's another thing called Clubhouse where you can just...
I'm familiar with that, yeah.
Yeah, so... there are things happening which I would call second and third generation social media apps that are going to change everybody's life, just as the devices we're both on right now have changed our lives. You can't do without them. So we look forward to growth through that. There are there's an astonishing number of people who want to get into the music business. A lot of people do have talent. It's a question of how well they market themselves, and also what kind of business people they are. I mean, for example, Ray Charles was a hell of a tough business person. You may remember, if you saw the film Ray, which was a biographical pic about Ray Charles, you may remember that he walks into the Mr. Big's office. He's got his first independent label that sort of establishes him, and he gets picked up by one of the big labels. And I think it was RCA Records, I don't remember, but he gets picked up by one of the big labels, and he walks into Mr. Big's office after his first album, which was a huge hit, a big album, first album for this big company. And they sit down, and the guy says, well, what brings you here? And he says, I want to own my masters. Now, masters is the term of art for the sound recordings, for the basic master sound recording, which used to be of higher quality than the copies. Not true anymore. And he said he wanted to own the sound recording copyright. There are two copyrights in music. There's the composer copyright, and there's the sound recording copyright. So when you're listening to a sound recording, could be that the artist that you're listening to also composed the music, but not necessarily true. Frank Sinatra didn't compose. Even today, a lot of the artists that you're assuming, like Barbra Streisand, compose the work that you're listening to. If you talk to them, you find that they may have done 2 or 3 tracks, but they may have composed 2 or 3 tracks on their latest album. They may also be co-credited on some of the others because they've told a starving songwriter, I won't record this. I won't record your song unless I'm given half credit on the quote music publishing, which is the composer copyright. And they often get their way because if it's a Beyonce album, she's going to sell 1 million copies. If you're a composer, you could be making $91,000 on those 1 million copies just in that kind of royalty. And so you'll take half of that, 45.5, rather than nothing. In fact, there's one other story I wanted to tell. I heard this.
Interesting. That's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I haven't represented her. But Dolly Parton, when she was a relative unknown, she was known in Nashville, but she wasn't anywhere near as known as she's become. She had written that song that Whitney Houston later made into the #1 hit of all time. I will always love you, da 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 da. That song. You can tell that I'm not a musical artist.
So I really didn't know I was going to get Barry to sing for us, but
oh yeah, here you go. I actually wasn't in the Yale freshman glee club, but anyway, she wanted to do a duet. It's a duet, if you remember the song. And it's a male-female duet. And she actually got Elvis to agree to come to Nashville, drive over to Nashville from Memphis, and do the duet with her. And of course, Elvis was already the king. You know, he was huge. And a few days before his arrival, and no doubt in one of his pink Cadillacs, his manager called Dolly and said, you know, Ms. Parton, Mr. Presley is going to insist on getting half of the composer rights, half of the music publishing rights to the song if he's going to perform it with you. And she said she thought a lot about it because she certainly could have used, you know, the money that she knew would be made if she could, you know, if he featured what's now called featuring on her recording. And but she said no. She held out. She said, I didn't want to give away half my rights when he hadn't done anything to compose the song. And later on, you know, Whitney Houston version made up for it. By that time, Dolly Parton was already rich. But it's an interesting point for a new composer. And most of them, I mean, if someone came to me and said, and was in that situation, I would say, look, as a business matter, as a matter for your career, give him half the publishing, give him half the composer copyright, even though he had nothing to do with it, just to get this out the door. She was very proprietary about and protective of what she had done, and she didn't want to do it. So that's the kind of thing that goes on in the music business. It's nothing necessarily dirty about that, but it is sort of telling an untruth because it says to the consumer, Elvis composed this along with Miss Parton, and it just wasn't true.
I mean, that could have taken her in a different direction instead of being as successful as she was.
Maybe. I mean, who knows?
And nowadays you see featured, and there's like 4 or 5 different people in a song, and you might not even know where they were part of the song.
Yes. Often in hip hop, where you see that, often you'll have the real composer who has already done the verse. I'm sorry, the hook, and each of those featured artists will contribute a verse after hearing the beat. They often do this remotely, by the way. You know, none of this is. I mean, I shouldn't say none. A lot of this is no longer done in that studio environment that we've all seen on TV, where they're all together.
Probably just like this, right?
Like this. Or even not like this, even alone. And then you ship the digital copy to where it needs to go, and maybe you go back and forth a few times on some of it, but that's the feature. Here's my feature. Pay me my $30,000.
Very cool. All right, I'm gonna start jumping into some of these songs.
Great.
Get my name out there.
All right. Well, you can send us a demo.
Yeah, I'll get my demo over to you. So we have a few questions here. One from Sean Ragsdale. Why did Taylor Swift redo her album?
I don't really know. We don't represent her. Could have been for a number of reasons. I don't know whether she went to a different company. She was in dispute. She was certainly in disputes with some of the online services, which don't pay a lot. She's absolutely right. So I don't know why she redid whatever album she redid. I'm sorry.
That's fine. You don't have to have all the answers to everything. So, and then this is from my business partner, Eric Olson. He asked, this is from an earlier comment you made about, the zero mistakes, the firm you're in before and now, I guess, kind of where you took that from. Basically ask what kind of processes, did you or do you put in place for keeping, a zero mistake kind of, record.
And of course, we don't quite attain that. I mean, but I would only tick off in the 25 years, probably 5 or 6 places where I thought we had really made an error on anything, and we fix them, or we return the client's money. I mean, that because we promised we hold ourselves out as a zero error outfit. Now there are obviously matters of judgment. I mean, I just pressed a client to go back to this is a company that wanted to buy out his company for 7 figures, and I pressed the client to be a little more aggressive in his response, and they walked away. Now they walked away for reasons which I think had nothing to do with the effort to be aggressive in the contract, but I don't know that. But that kind of thing is judgment. And I wouldn't call that an error in lawyering. I wouldn't call that a professional error, unless you're being wildly stupid and you go with someone who's got no track record and you insist on Elvis Presley's deal. I mean, that's not going to happen. I often joke about how one guy walked into my office. He was going to be in a new reality TV show. It was a week when Ted Danson had just signed $1 million per episode contract for what was the bar? Nobody Knows Your Name. What was I can't remember now the name.
Cheers.
Yes, thank you. He had just signed $1 million an episode, and this guy who had no track record, hadn't made anybody a nickel, started. I told him, I said, when you start in reality, you're not going to make much the first year, or the second, or the third, or how long they tie you up for. But if it gets renewed, as happened with Jersey Shore, for example, then you can press them, because if you're absolutely essential to the storyline or to the adventures that people are tuning in to watch, you're a valuable commodity. You bring them all the value. You can push them for a much better deal in your second contract. But I explained to him that if we're talking, 5,000 tops per episode in the first season of a new reality series, didn't even have a home yet. There was no pilot. And he said, well, what do you mean? Ted Danson just signed $1 million an episode contract. And I tried to be nice, but I tried to explain that you're no Ted Danson, and we don't know that you will be. But you often have unrealistic expectations like that, very much in music.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, so there's a lot of the reality TV, and I would think, I'm always thinking, hey, I wonder how much they make, or they're paid to do this. They have
surprisingly little for the startup period.
That makes sense. They don't even know if it's going to work out, right? So
they have no idea of your value. It's a different story if you're bringing someone in that already has a huge following. Whether these days on social media would be the place you'd look. That's one of the metrics. For example, and I'm going to get back to Eric's question, but one of the things that we look for example, people will call us and say, well, can you set me up for an audition with a record company? And it's possible we could do that. We have contacts and all that, but that's not going to get them anywhere. What they have to do is get their material online. They have to be selling and streaming online on their own. And if they have a huge subscriber base or a lot of sales that we can brag about, then we can go to somebody and say, well, here are the metrics that this guy's already got. Used to be that you had the golden ear phenomenon where people like Clive Davis, for example, a famous name, would say this guy or this woman, this is the package. This is going to be a big hit act. These days, there's a lot less speculation about it. There still is some gut instinct, but there's a lot less speculation about it because you can look and you can say, well, geez, you've got 100,000 views in a month. In fact, this is what happened to the model that I mentioned with the $300,000 day rate for that one day, at least, not every day, that I know of. But this is what happened with her. There was a photo taken of her out of the blue at a college function that went viral like gangbusters within 48
all you need.
hours. Yeah. Soon, with no experience in the industry that I know of anyway, she was signed to a deal with a big New York modeling agency, and she's gone on already to have a terrific career her first few years. So lightning can strike, but it's not a good business strategy to wait for it. So let me get back to Eric's question. There's nothing magical about it. What we do, first of all, Eric, is we have sort of firm-wide templates for things that we do. Although I'll tell you what my rules are. So everybody sort of starts not with a clean sheet of paper, unless, again, it's one of these things that we've never dealt with before, which is rare. I mean, it's maybe 10 to 15% of the things that come in are things we've never done before. Usually it's something that's a lot like something else we've done. They're never quite the same, but a lot like it. So we start out with a sheet of paper of whatever length that's already got most of the questions dealt with and most things written very carefully. But rule number one, whoever the lawyer is who's preparing the one for this client, you got to read through every word of that make sure every word of the contract, even if it's a 25-page contract, and we've got some of those, is perfect for this client. And then, in many cases, not always, depending on what it is, I'm going to look over the document before it goes out. And one of the things I've noticed about myself, sometimes to my irritation, is that I will certainly pick up a typo. Oh, I meant to tell you that one of the examples that the firm used to use was that a letter never went out of that great firm with a typo in it. And this was back in the days before, global corrections.
Grammar check.
Yeah, well, thank God for that, because spell check is a pain in the neck. But, this was way before that. And so that's part of it, is that it tends to start with a document that's already been well worn and has already succeeded. I mean, we occasionally have had clients sued, and we've never lost. Our document's never been invalidated. So we start with that. And then where it is something that's very new, either I or my partner will review it word for word before it goes out to make sure that there are no boo-boos in it. And we don't catch many of them in that last review, but sometimes.
Very nice. So extra set of eyes, double checking. That's great.
That was also the key in that large firm I was with, because you had, as I say, very high-powered lawyers, usually staffing 3 or 4 lawyers deep on everything. And we don't do that because it's very expensive. But when you're representing CDS and General Motors and a lot of other clients that firm had, they could afford it. And in those days, this is before the days, I'm not sure when those happened exactly, when companies were watching their pennies and nickels on legal fees. So you could really, God knows what we ran up each quarter for CDS.
Oh, wow. I'm sure it was a lot. Yeah, well, not as quite as, I guess, critical, but, for us, we're putting out content for law firms or social media posts, and we have a internal peer review before we send it to a client to even look at, and then they have to approve it, and then we post it up, because you figure we're on their social media, which could have thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers.
Actually, Kevin, and I never should have. When we're doing a document, it first goes to the client, obviously, and we will then usually talk the client through the whole thing and call their attention to areas where we think they may have a comment or a revision that they want or what have you. So that's another check, and then we get it back, and we'll have it ready for prime time in the next draft. So there is that third check where the client gets to make sure that we haven't committed some boo-boo of some sort, and that often leads to improving the document.
Awesome. All right. Well, Eric, there's your answer. 3 checks. This guy's not missing nothing, so he's got it covered. All right. Well, is Barry, anything else you want to add?
The only thing I would add is I guess 2 things. One, because of the speed at which we all live these days, it becomes more and more difficult to continue and to maintain that standard of quality. I send a client a text about something or an email or a document, and 30 minutes later they're on the phone. I'm onto something else, of course, but it's how come you didn't get back to me yet? And so we all live in this sort of environment that isn't quite a human timeline environment, and that is making it more difficult to perform at the level we'd like to perform. I mean, we do get some space, obviously, when we send it out to the client. If it's a 25-page document, you're pretty sure you're not going to hear back from them for a couple of days. I need
a couple of nights to read this.
Yeah. I always advise them. I say, look, don't try to do this in one sitting. Read what, and I say, mark up whatever you don't understand, because I want you to understand that. I want to make sure that if it comes to that, a judge will understand it and won't get creative with it. So it's got to be precise in that sense. I mean, that's part of what I mean by 0 errors, because you're not only talking about making sure that you've done it right by the client, but you have to worry about what happens if and when this is challenged. Because if a judge finds ambiguity, you have two possibilities, both bad. One is that you'll have a battle of the expert witnesses. Anybody who's been watching any of this Derek Chauvin trial will see that you have battling expert witnesses, and the jury will have to decide which one they're more impressed with. But you don't want that, and so you don't want to have expert witnesses in to say what's a fair amount for a Grammy-winning producer to collect off of such and such, because you'll have different opinions depending on who's paying the expert. And the second possibility, which is just as bad, is that the judge will get creative. And some of those rules of legal construction have nothing to do with building buildings. It comes from the word construe, which means to interpret. And the judges sometimes will, if they haven't seen something before, will construe it against whoever wrote it, because that person or that law firm created an ambiguity. So God forbid we want to leave an ambiguity. And so we try to be very precise, very explicit. That's one reason why folks out there, if those of you who are not lawyers and get irritated with lawyers because the verbiage seems so plodding and so difficult to get through, that's why. Because you want to expunge every conceivable ambiguity.
Now I know why.
Smith, off on a tangent, tangent about it.
Yeah, our business lawyers, I'm always like, what does that mean? And then they tell me, I'm like, oh, well, could have been a lot easier to explain that. But
well, it may be that if you explain it in lay terms, that ambiguity squeezes out of one side or the other, and that would be a mistake. You don't want, that's not what the client's paying for.
That's a good tip right there. So, Barry, is your website Entertainment Lawyer Miami?
Actually, you can get there with ChaseLawyers.com. ChaseLawyers is the DBA of the firm. We're in Miami and New York, and as I say, we cover Miami, DC, and New York. We have two lawyers who are just New York, and a couple who are just Florida. But we deal with all those, and ChaseLawyers.com is the website. You can also follow us. I'm not sure what it must be hashtag ChaseLawyers. You can also follow us on various social media. And I'm just trying to think. Oh, yes, we also have a YouTube channel.
Oh, really?
Excellent. YouTube decided that they were going to make it optional whether you say Chase Space Lawyers, which is not the way we style ourselves, or Chase Lawyers, which is the capital L in the middle. YouTube, you can find us either way. Just go to YouTube and search for Chase Lawyers either way, and you'll find a bunch of videos. Some of which are, I think, fairly entertaining.
I'll share the link here in the comments. So everyone can check that out.
Yeah. You should check out our Chase Lawyers YouTube video collection. It's got a lot of interesting information. The most popular one is actually one that I did. I say immodestly. My partner did a number of them, and we have associates who've done some. But it's about how to start a record label and not stub your toe and get into trouble later. And it's out of the office. The producer did a great job. The producer and the director, they have these getting into a car in a pouring rain, going to the courthouse, complaining about having to go to the courthouse because this client didn't do the right thing at the beginning. Anyway, that's the sentence. So some of them are fairly entertaining. And
that's good. Good content for someone that's trying to start out like that. So anyone listening, trying to start a record label, or if you need someone to talk to about entertainment law,
right,
definitely reach out to Barry. And Barry, LinkedIn, I think that's where we may have connected.
It may be.
Is that a good place to reach out?
That we routinely will talk to someone with no charge for, I hate to mention this because the lawyers will kill me, up to 15 or 20 minutes, just to know what's going on and to give them a little bit of guidance. And often I know they do too, will say to the client, look, you can do this yourself. Setting up a company is no big mystery. Just go to this site. You can set it up in any state. Just look for the Secretary of State's office, and you probably can figure out how to do this without paying me my hourly fee to go do it, just to set up your company. And now it is true that some clients who do that commit a typo, which later has to be resolved and is a pain in the neck to try to fix. But usually they're okay.
Excellent. All right. Well, that's good to know. So, yeah, and sometimes I'm sure clients are at a level they don't need your assistance or another lawyer's assistance yet. But
Right.
if you're going to write something you hope to produce or put out there, you want to get ahead of that. You don't want to do it and then come to a lawyer.
Yeah,
correct?
That's right. You need at least a passing acquaintance with how copyright works, because that's the common denominator of virtually all the work we do, whether it's film or TV or music or even the social media. It's important because they all operate on copyright principles, which have not changed, despite the fact that we're in a digital age and the law is slow to catch up. But it is, particularly in these days where the speed of life is like the speed of light. It is important that you know something about what you're up to. That's how the money gets made. I wrote an ebook, which I'll be happy to send to anybody who wants to get one, which has been retitled by my much better marketing younger attorney associate named Alex Leveco, who told me that instead of calling it revenue streams or something like that, which I had originally entitled it, it's only a 7 or 8 page thing. He said, call it How to Protect Your Music, and you'll get more people interested. But it goes through the revenue stream for the 2 copyrights that I mentioned earlier, for composers, and on the other hand, for performing artists, recording artists, who sometimes are the same, but often are not. It's the Beatles that started that. The reason why you assume they're the same is because the Beatles only record, almost, except for some Ray Charles stuff, except for some Everly Brothers stuff, and some other early, the great, Johnny B. Good. Anyway, the great old black artists that they sometimes re-recorded, but otherwise it was all written by Lennon and McCartney, and everybody thought, oh, gee, well, artists must always write their own stuff, but it's not true. Never been true.
Interesting. Well, very cool. I didn't know that at all. So I learned a lot today about that. And I think the ebook name change is for the better. I think a lot more people would be interested.
How to Protect. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think I called it How Money Gets Made, and whatever it was. I thought it was snappy enough, but my marketing skills improved since.
All right. Well, reach out to Barry, connect with him, connect him on LinkedIn, check out his website. I put the link to his YouTube. Reach out if you got any questions. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you. And Barry, thanks for joining me.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, good. Enjoyed it.